Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Thorson. It is Sunday, November 30th, 2025. If you're watching this, I'm redoing my Unit 5 Lesson 48 video. The previous one was 4 years old. I recorded in 2021, had more than 237 views, but it needed to be updated. So that is what I'm going to do. So this is from Unit 5, which is Heredity, and it focuses specifically on a scientist named Thomas Hunt Morgan and sex-linked traits. So here we go. So the first thing I want to go over is remind you of what autosomes are. Autosomes is a term that we've had earlier in this unit. Whoops. Autosomes are generally chromosomes that carry traits in which gender is a non-factor. So generally, it's things like the genes that are responsible for your bones, your skin, your organs, your organ systems, your blood. You know, males and females have 10 fingers and 10 toes. It's not a gender exclusive trait. And so when it comes to humans, these are going to be pairs 1 through 22. Notice how I said pairs. You all should know by now that humans have 46 chromosomes. That's 23 pairs. Autosomes are pairs 1 through 22. So you've heard me say in class that a male and a female are generally 22, 23rds the same. Um, we all have the same traits on your autosomes, no matter if you're a male or a female. But then we have the topic, which is the main event for this discussion, and that's going to be sex chromosomes. These are chromosomes that carry traits. Oops. In which gender is a factor. Now, there's basically two sex chromosomes that we want to discuss, is mainly in mammals. Different types of animals have different sex chromosomes, like birds have the Z and the W, but we want to focus on the X and the Y. So there is an X chromosome and there is a Y chromosome. And in general, a normal, quote unquote, normal human would have two sex chromosomes. If you are a female, you have two X chromosomes. If you looked at them on a karyotype is a visual representation of an individual's chromosomes. They look identical to each other. So there's one X, you inherit that from one parent, and then there's the other X, you inherit that from the other. They're pretty big. They can hold up to 1,100 genes, give or take a few. And if you were to actually look at a karyotype, this is your 23rd pair, your final pair. So if you looked at a karyotype of an embryo, and when you're looking at an embryo, there's no genitalia to see to determine if it's a male or female. You have to look at the chromosomes. If you saw these chromosomes on the karyotype, you know that it is going to be a girl. But on the other hand, if it's going to be a male, there's one X, one Y, and they look like this. The Y chromosome is a fraction of the size of the X chromosome. It can carry less than 100 genes, if I'm not mistaken. So if you were to look at a karyotype and you saw those two chromosomes in the final pair, you know that that would end up being a boy. Now, when it comes to females, a female has two X chromosomes in every somatic cell in her body, every single somatic cell. But as you should know, your gametes, which are your eggs for females and sperm for males, only carry one of your X chromosomes. Now, 100% of egg cells in females carry one X. I'm going to pull asterisk here. When I put that asterisk, I mean that 50% carry the maternal X. Girls, this is the X you inherited from your mother. And then the other 50% carry the paternal, which means the father side X. So girls, you all have two X chromosomes. You inherited one from your mother, one from your father. That's a done deal. But when you have children and your child inherits an X chromosome from you, it is no doubt that they are going to inherit an X chromosome. But which one did they inherit? The one that you got from your mom or the one you got from your dad? It's a coin flip. Now, boys, when it comes to you, 50% of sperm carry an X. You inherited that from your mother. And then your other 50% of sperm carry a Y. That's from your father. So the male ultimately determines the gender of the offspring. Females pass on one X no matter what. So if you're a female watching this, you inherited an X from your mother. That's a done deal. But what truly made you a girl is that you inherited your second X from your father, which he got from his mom. Now, if you're a male and you're watching this, you inherited your X chromosome from your mother, just like the girls did. But instead of you inheriting an X from your father, you inherited a Y from your father. And that's what made you a male. So there's a quick rundown of sex chromosomes and how they're arranged in us. Now, this is the man of the hour. This gentleman here that you see an image of is Thomas Hunt Morgan. And Thomas Hunt Morgan was born in 1866. So it's kind of like the American Civil War era. And he died in 1945, which is World War II era. He was a geneticist. And when I say geneticist, I don't mean that he studied DNA in a laboratory or something like that. You got to keep in mind the time era in which he lived. He studied inheritance patterns, just like Gregor Mendel did. In fact, he idolized Gregor Mendel. That was his hero. He did a lot of his experiments based on Gregor Mendel's models. But instead of using fruit fly, or excuse me, I gave it away. Instead of using pea plants like Gregor Mendel did, Thomas Hunt Morgan studied traits of Drosophila, melanogaster, which is a species of fruit flies. Now, one of the reasons several reasons why fruit flies are used in genetics is some are the same as pea plants. So why fruit flies? Well, they reproduce and they grow quickly. As a former college student, back in my day, I just sound really old for saying that. We use fruit flies in genetics lab. If any of you want to go into biology or medicine, biomedical sciences, anything like that, it's very likely you'll have to take genetics. And I would strongly encourage you to do that. It was a really fun class. You meet for lecture for about an hour and 15 minutes twice a week. You could even do it online. I think I did that. I lecture online, but I had to go in person for lab, and lab is once a week for a couple hours. And a typical college semester is 16 weeks. So in the first week, with the first week's lab, week one, the professor's assistant gave us a bag of male flies and a bag of female flies, and we had to put them together so they can mate. So that was week one. Week two, there were already eggs. So the males and females had mated, and there were eggs everywhere in the jar that we put them in. And then by week three, those eggs had not only hatched into larvae, but they had already grown into adult flies. So we went from week one, where the parents meeting, to week three, where their offspring were already adults. So they reproduce and they grow rapidly. They have many traits to study. You could talk about the color of the fly, the shape of the wings fly, the shape I'm sorry, the shape of the fly's wings, the shape of their abdomens, the different other body parts, their eye color, lots of different traits you could study. But something that was also very curious, which is going to kind of be foreshadowing for what I'm going over. They had the same sex chromosomes as humans, which means females are XX, males are XY, just like us. So that made things very interesting. But that discovery came a little bit later. Okay. So what I want to go over now is one of the most famous experiments in all of biology, and it was conducted by Thomas Hunt Morgan. And it was an experiment involved in the breeding of flies with different eye colors. Okay, so to kind of give you a bit of a reference, in flies, the dominant trait is red eyes. And in a term I haven't been using a whole lot in class, which I'm going to resolve now, is wild type. Wild type means dominant, okay? But in the rest of this lecture, in these notes, I'm not going to say dominant. I'm going to refer to wild type. Wild type is the dominant form. You can call it the normal form. And then white eyes are what we call the mutant trait, or you could call that recessive if you wish. But I want you to know that wild type means dominant, mutant means recessive, okay? So Thomas Hunt Morgan conducted an experiment where he crossed a fly with red eyes, and this was a female. So there's the female symbol. Her phenotype is red. That is wild type. And Thomas Hunt Morgan crossed it. If I accidentally said Mendel, I apologize. I can't recall. Been a long day. Um, Thomas Hunt Morgan crossed it with a white-eyed fly, which is the mutant trait, and that was a male. And so if you recall in Gregor Mendel's experiment, he crossed a tall plant with a short plant. And you remember what all the offspring were? They were all tall. And that's where he discovered dominant traits and recessive traits, which is the same thing as saying wild type traits and mutant traits, because when he crossed a tall plant with a short plant, all the offspring were tall. So that proved that some traits can be dominant to others. Well, Thomas L. Morgan was really trying to do the same thing, just with flies. And from the P generation, the F1s were born. And 100% were red-eyed. This was all females, all males. Every last one of them had red eyes. And so if you also recall in Gregor Mendel's experiment, he allowed the F1 plants to self-fertilize like they naturally do. And the outcomes there were 3-1, 75, 25, 75%, 25%, 75% were tall, 25% were short. Well, you can't really have flies self-fertilize. That's not how they breed. But what you do have is you have a lot of males and a lot of females. Technically, they're brothers and sisters, but don't let it get to you. They're just bugs. It happens all the time in the bug life. He allowed, I'm going to abbreviate Thomas Hunt Morgan as THM. Thomas Hunt Morgan allowed F1 flies to interbreed. Okay? This produced the F2 generation. And here's what came about. There were plenty of red-eyed flies, and then there were white-eyed flies. And the ratio was 3-1. So Thomas Hunt Morgan's thinking, I'm just like my idol Gregor Mendel. He crossed a tall with a short, got all tall. And then he allowed those talls to self-fertilize, and he made a 3-to-1 ratio of tall to short, dominant to recessive, or wild type to mutant. He thought he's just like his hero. But there's a catch. Of these flies, yes, 75% were wild type, which is red. However, this included 100% of females. So what I'm saying is all the females in the F2 generation had red eyes, but 50% of the males had red eyes. Now, 25% of the entire population had white eyes, but that other 50% of males was in that group. And so he did this experiment again and again and again and again. That's a very important tenet of science is you can't just do an experiment one time, two times, or three times, or a dozen times to try to have credible results. You really have to do it, honestly, nowadays, probably millions of times. And you also have to have other scientists review your work and do your same procedure and get the same outcome. That's part of the scientific method. So Thomas Hunt Morgan was really perplexed as to why are all the white ones only male? Why no females? So he did the experiment again and again and again, so many times. He kept getting the same results. 75% red, 25% white. But all those white-eyed flies were males, no females. And then it finally hit him. He realized the trait for eye color was carried on a sex chromosome where gender does matter. This led to the discovery of sex-linked traits. A sex-linked trait is exactly what it sounds like. It is a trait carried on a sex chromosome. Now, there's two types of sex chromosomes. So you can have an X-linked trait, which is what we primarily speak of in my class. This is just what it sounds like. It's carried on an X chromosome. And then you have a Y-linked trait, which is carried on a Y chromosome. We really don't talk about it, but the logic is the same. Now, let's make sure that we have something very, very well understood. In class, I asked my students, can a male inherit an X-linked trait? Yes, because they have X chromosomes. Can a female inherit an X-linked trait? Yes, because they have X chromosomes. Okay. Can a male inherit a Y-linked trait? Yes, because they have a Y chromosome. Can a female inherit a Y-linked trait? No, because they do not have a Y chromosome. Now, again, another round of questioning here. Can a female inherit an X-linked trait from her mother? Yes, because females can pass on an X from them to their daughters. Can a male inherit an X-linked trait from his mother? Yes, because males inherit their only X chromosome from their mother. All right, so now let's go to the other parent. Can a female inherit an X-linked trait from her father? Yes, because females inherit an X-linked trait from dad. And so can males inherit a Y-linked trait, or excuse me, an X-linked trait from dad? No, because males don't inherit an X-linked trait from dad. So let's put that on the paper. Here's mom. Here's dad. All right, so for all you visual learners, if you're going to have a daughter and you're going to have a son, let's get this understood. Can a daughter is XX, a son is XY. Can a daughter inherit an X chromosome from mom? Yes. What about dad? Yes. They can. Can a son inherit an X chromosome uh, from mom? Yes. How about dad? No, because sons do not inherit an X chromosome from their father. They inherit a Y. So X's can go from mom to daughter or dad to daughter. X's can go from mom to son, but not dad to son. Okay? Now, talk about Y link traits. Can a father pass on a Y link trait to his son? Yes. Can it pass on a Y link trait to daughter? No, because daughters don't have Y chromosomes. So I hope that clears that up. Now, when we go back to the cross here, I want to go over genotypes of the parents. And to do that, you can do a simple Punnett square. The mother is a female, and the father of the P generation is a male. The mother had to have been homozygous dominant. And the father had to be hemizygous recessive, which is a term I'll expand upon shortly. He is carrying one copy of the eye color gene, and it is a recessive copy. Therefore, he will have the recessive trait. The mother is carrying two copies of the wild type trait. Therefore, she has the wild type phenotype, which is red. Now, if you cross these two flies in this Punnett square, as I am, and by the way, don't write like this. That's not how you do it. Don't let me see that on your work. So there's the mother up top. Those are her eggs. 50% of this father's sperm will have the X with the mutated eye color gene, and then a Y that doesn't have anything. So let's do the crosses. Okay. So if you look at each box, this is heterozygous, red, heterozygous, red, hemizygous dominant, red, hemizygous dominant, red. 100% of the offspring, males and females, are going to have red eyes. And so all the offspring here are their females and they're heterozygous, or they're males and they're hemizygous dominant. And so then Thomas Hunt Morgan let those flies breed. Watch what you get. Here's the females. Here's the males. That is homozygous dominant. That is going to be a red-eyed female. This is heterozygous. That is going to also be a red-eyed female. So 100% of the females are going to have red eyes in this cross. That is hemizygous dominant. That is red. That is hemizygous recessive. That is white. So you can see in the entire generation, there's a 3-to-1 ratio, or you could say 75% to 25%. But notice how if I asked you what percent of the females will be red-eyed, it's 100%. What percent of the males will be red-eyed? It's 50%. The other 50 are going to be the white-eyed males. So notice how I wrote those genotypes. So now I want to go over is that word I was using. I want to talk about genotypes, phenotypes, and gender. Okay. This is homozygous dominant. There are two copies of the dominant, aka wild type trait. The genotype is red, which is the wild type trait. And this is a female. Next, this is a heterozygous individual. They can also be referred to as a carrier or a hybrid. However, they will have the red or wild type trait, and they will be female. Next, homozygous recessive. They have two copies of the recessive or mutant trait, and they will be a female. Next, here's a new word for you. I said it earlier. Hemizygous dominant. Now, before I go any further, hemi means half. Like you live in the northern hemisphere. Um, the Y chromosome does not carry this trait. Only the X does. So when it comes to this, it is red, which is wild type. Um, only females can be carriers for a X-linked trait because females have two X's. They can have a dominant form and a recessive form. Males, you will only have one copy. You either have the normal form, which we call wild type, or you have the recessive form, which we call mutant. And so males can only have one copy of an X-linked trait. And that goes for Y as well. While females can have two copies of an X-linked trait. So they can be carriers, males cannot. Okay? So when you're doing Punnett squares, you can do a lot of those crosses. That's how you write out the actual genotypes. Now, let's talk about sex-linked traits in humans. There's two that you really need to know. I'm going to show you some stuff on the internet I have set up. First one is red-green color blindness. Now, quick background information. Human eyes have two types of photoreceptors, which means light receptors. We have rods, which see black and white. Fun fact, we know that dogs mostly see black and white because when scientists have dissected dog eyes, they noticed that there were really only rods there. There weren't the second type, which are cones. Cones can see color. Now, for humans, and this is important, humans have three types of cone cells. We have blue, we have red, and we have green. When it comes to animal or human eyes in the entire animal kingdom, if you had to give them a grade, you would give human eyes a C. We're not the best, we're not the worst, we're right there in the middle. There are some animals that can't see in front of their face. Their vision is so bad. While there's other animals like mainly birds of prey, they can see a flea on the back of an elephant from 5 miles away. Their vision is incredible. We're in the middle of the pack. So I would give our eyes a C grade. Now, there are some animals that I want to try to switch here for a sec. If I could show you the internet, let me try to get it set up here. Okay. Let me show you this guy. This is a mantis shrimp. They have 9 different types of cone cells. So if you want to really mess with your head, try to imagine a color that you can't see or that you never seen. You can't do it. This animal can see way more than we can. Again, we have three cone cells, red, blue, red, green. These guys have nine. So what they see puts us to shame. Okay. But back to this. And I'll go back to the internet momentarily. The genetics that are responsible for your blue cone cells, they're found on chromosome 7. So in class, I'd ask you, what type of chromosome is chromosome 7? And everyone resoundingly said it is an autosome. So males and females have that in common. But for reasons that we don't fully understand, red and green are on the X chromosome. So it's X-linked, which means it is on a sex chromosome. And we don't know why. Being able to see red and green has nothing to do with being a boy or a girl. So we don't know why a trait that is on sex chromosomes, which have everything to do with your gender, are located there. We don't know. Now, people that have red-green color blindness, um, they could just have a deficiency in one of those or both. Individuals may have a deficiency solely in green or solely in red, or they could have both. There's protan and deutan, and don't quote me on this. Protan, I think, is where you have it, your green is fine, but you have a deficiency in red. And the deutan is when you have the opposite. Let me check. I'm just looking at my phone real quick. So protan is the deficiency in red, and deutan is the deficiency in green, or you could have both. Now, people will interpret these colors as gray, very, very gray. So to kind of give you an idea of how this can affect people, let me go back to the internet here and some pages I have set up. Back in the 20 teens, the NFL had a campaign, a uniform campaign on Thursday Night Football called the Color Rush, where every team would wear these monochromatic jerseys and pants and socks. And you can see the picture here. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had red jerseys and red pants. This was the Color Rush. The very first game that had the Color Rush campaign was right here. The Buffalo Bills in the New York Jets. So let me refresh the page here so you can see the picture or not. Oh, there it is. The Buffalo Bills in the New York Jets. So I hope you caught a glimpse of it. The website's being really unkind to me right now. But to kind of just put it in a nutshell, the Buffalo Bills had white helmets with, so we have white with red jerseys and red pants, while the New York Jets had white helmets with green jerseys and green pants. And no one ever thought anything of it. This is the NFL. These are businessmen that run the show. But they got a bunch of calls the next day because it was thousands of colorblind Americans not being able to tell one team from the other because all they could see is basically guys running around in green uniforms with white helmets. And so the NFL had to change their policy whenever they had teams wearing red or green. Obviously, not something that they thought would be a problem, but that again, that goes back. They're businessmen, not not geneticists. Now, to put a cap on this, color blindness is of Northern European ancestry. In class, I had several students who were related to somebody who was colorblind, and I asked them what's their heritage. I got responses like Irish, Scottish, Scandinavian, which is what I am. Yeah, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, Finnish. So um, it all added up. If you are of African ancestry or Asian or South American, Central America, North American, you're not going to have this. If you took a DNA test and it says that you are of Northern European descent, that's more likely to be in you. And of that group of humans, it's 1 in 12 males and 1 in 200 females. Now, in the next lesson, I'll get into how to track a trait through a pedigree, but to kind of give a little preview of that, the reason why males have it more prominently, and if you're watching this, you may know someone who's colorblind. I'm going to say the odds are it's a male. All they require, all they require is a carrier mother. If a male has a mother who's a carrier for colorblindness, her sons have a 50-50 chance of being colorblind. Now, I miswrote this. I just saw that. I apologize. It is females. Um, they require, at minimum, a carrier mother and an affected father. Because again, a woman could be a carrier for it and not be colorblind. Some students in my classes are carriers. And in lesson 49, I'll explain how I know for sure that they are a carrier. Okay, and then one last thing, let me go back to the internet again. If you want to give someone that you may suspect being colorblind, go here, take the colorblind test, and it's pretty definitive. It's pretty easy as well. It's just a bunch of images with numbers, and if you cannot see the numbers, then you might have some color deficiency in your vision. Okay. Now, the other type of trait that you need to know that is X-linked is called hemophilia. Heme means blood. Hemophilia is a deficiency in clotting factor. And so the result is you bleed excessively. I'm sure that we've all gotten cuts. We've skinned a knee, we've cut a finger, or so on and so on, bit your lip, and you bled for maybe a minute, less than a minute, then it stopped. Because in your blood, you have an element called platelets. And platelets are basically like, they're kind of like a sealant, where if you bled, you ruptured a blood vessel, and that blood vessel is leaking, just like a pipe or a hose. Platelets will close it. And the smaller the blood vessel, the easier it is to clot it. But people that are hemophiliacs don't really have this. They bleed and 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 they bleed. So the risks are, um, or the symptoms are that they can bruise easily. A bruise is just a pool of blood beneath your skin that's due to bleeding. And you do risk internal bleeding. If you were bleeding from your finger, we can see it and we can cover it up and put pressure on it and try to prevent the bleeding from getting worse. But if you have a blood vessel inside your body that's leaking, think about how hard it would be to find a pipe in a building that's leaking. You'd have to just tear away walls and floors and ceilings to try to find the leaky pipe because you can't see it. That's the problem with internal bleeding. And if you are bleeding internally, you have an internal leak, and that could lead to death because your blood is supposed to stay in your blood vessels, not leaking all over the place inside your body. But yeah, hemophilia is definitely X-linked, and as is with the red-green color blindness, males have a greater propensity to get it than females simply because all they need is a carrier mother. Okay. So that is it for this lesson. I will continue talking about sex-linked traits in lesson 49 in regards to pedigrees, and then X chromosome inactivation.